Okay, we're back in session once again. The next committee is Community and Economic Development. Michael Lillquist, Chair.
Thank you, Gene. Joining me on the Community Economic Development Committee are Council Members Vargas and Murphy. We have one item before us today. It's entitled 1% for the Arts presentation. Staff, Ms. Coles, will provide an overview of the 1% for the Arts concept and introduce a possible framework for the City of Bellingham 1% program. A percent for the Arts program requires that a qualifying large capital project to allocate a percentage of the eligible funds for the incorporation or purchase of public artwork. Staff is seeking direction from the City Council on whether to draft an implementing ordinance for consideration at a later date. And I believe some state agencies already have a similar kinds of provision. So, Ms. Coles?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Darby Coles with Planning and Community Development Department, and we are here today to discuss a 1% for the Arts concept. And this has been an idea that's been around for a while. And I think we do have one Arts Commission member here today. They've been working very diligently on promoting this type of program. So we're excited to present an idea for your consideration. And what is a percent for the Arts program? Percent for the Arts are intended to support integration of artwork into the public realm, into public projects. And these programs require certain projects to set aside a portion of their budget for artwork. So the state of Washington, they adopt a program in 1972, and you've probably seen the effects of this program when you're driving down I-5 and you see the print on the highway, or at state-funded colleges, you'll see things like stained glass or artwork incorporated. And since 1972, there's been a number of cities, I think at least 20 in the state of Washington, that have followed up with their own percent programs. It includes cities like Edmonds, Olympia, Tacoma, all cities that are really noted for their regional draw for the arts, which Bellingham is one of these communities. We are very well known. We've become a growing attraction for tourists and just for local people, and the experience that they can have here with our artwork. And we have some really good policy support already on the books. As you know, one of Council's legacies and strategic commitments is about quality of life, and it specifically talks about how artwork contributes to that. And then in the recently adopted economic development chapter, there's a substantial amount of language that talks about how quality of life is one of our best tools that we have for retaining and recruiting businesses. So we already have that commitment, and it's expressed in a number of ways. We already have ongoing contributions to the Whatcom Museum, to Mount Baker Theater, and extensive investment in artwork downtown and in our parks. We have over 84 sculptures in the city's existing system, and you might have seen that our newest one is going to be dedicated a week from Friday. It's Nootka, and it's going into Cornwall Park, so you're all invited to that dedication. So we already incorporate art into our parks, we incorporate it into our streets, and we incorporate it into our buildings because we know that this creates a vital sense of place. It creates that uniqueness and it expresses what's special about Bellingham, especially because we do support a number of artists employment-wise, and we do have this reputation as being an artwork community. So a percent for the Arts program would formalize these existing practices, and it would actually establish some clear thresholds and some clear procedures for when we incorporate artwork into our projects. And this would be done in a manner that doesn't significantly impact the city's budget. So what staff is proposing for your consideration at this time is that the program would only apply to the largest capital projects that are already adopted in the city's capital improvement plan. It would be for projects over $2 million. And what would happen is that 1% of these projects' budgets would be allocated and set aside to incorporate artwork. So just a side note, most of the time in these large capital projects, there's between 10 to 20% that's already set aside as a contingency fund. So it's highly likely that these projects wouldn't add increases to the already planned for expenditures. Additionally, capital projects are rarely paid for with general fund. So if there are state or federal funding sources or grant funds that aren't eligible for artwork, that would not be included in the 1% allocation. So we'd have to be really careful about how the projects are funded and how we use those dollars. And of course, projects that aren't visible to the public wouldn't have an artwork element incorporated. So we would make sure to go through some pretty specific exemptions for which projects would be applied. And again, these programs are really intended to integrate artwork into the projects. Some examples, like this bridge in Olympia, is to do artistic handrails. Or you may see stained glass instead of just plain translucent glass. Street prints are also a really common way of integrating artwork. Bay Street, the project that the city did for the Arts District, that's an example of a tessellation pattern that was incorporated into the sidewalk. Standalone sculpture could also be considered if the budget allowed, but for each applicable project, city staff and the Arts Commission would take a look and make a recommendation for the most appropriate way to incorporate the artwork, following adopted procedures and policies. So these 8 projects listed here are the ones currently adopted in the city's capital improvement plan that would be subject to that 2 million threshold and that are visible to the public eye. So by way of example, the Cordata Neighborhood Park is currently has an estimated budget of $3.6 million. So the application of a 1% program would be $36,000 for integration of artwork. For comparison purposes, the sculpture at the WTA downtown station that the city partnered with WTA on, that was a $60,000 sculpture. So in this particular situation, it probably wouldn't be enough funding to do a standalone, but they could look at ways at incorporating some of those integrated elements. And the responsible department heads, as these projects move forward, would need to look at the eligible expenses and come up with that number. So the city and the Arts Commission really believe that this is the time for us to take a look at this program. It would reinforce our image as a regional arts destination and formalize a lot of the work that's already being done. So we are at this point requesting direction from council on whether you'd like us to bring forward an ordinance, and we'd be happy to discuss any considerations or questions that you would have about what that would look like.
Thank you, Darby. Committee members? Pinky?
I love this idea. I love finding ways for us to bring more art to the city. I do have a question. I'm wondering if there's any way that we could state a preference for local designers and artists for these projects, because I believe that supports our Be Local and our economic vitality, and I'm wondering if that discussion has been had around a preference. And I believe the state law does allow us contracting authority, and I think the Bellingham School District has a local as an example. So I'm just wondering if we've had that discussion around local and if that's something we could talk about. But otherwise, I'm 100% behind you.
Could I address this one?
It's really challenging for the city to limit the selection of contractors or goods and services, et cetera, to local. Something we could explore on a project-by-project basis, possibly if there was a need for a local artist specifically to that project. But it's challenging for us to do that.
I just want to say I've come from communities where there is 1% for art, and it is such an amazing thing to incorporate. And Pinky, I value what you're trying to do for the local artists, but there were some major projects that I saw happen where you needed the specific expertise of an artist that maybe wasn't in the area. And that was what created a legacy of a lifetime of improvement. In one sense, it supports art, but it also just makes our community so much more attractive, and it actually helps and benefits the property that's getting redeveloped. And it just makes everything more walkable, more livable, and I just can't say enough about how excited I am that we're looking at this.
Okay, I'm going to speak first, and I'll recognize Terry after me. I'm highly in support of this. As you pointed out, we have a legacy commitment for quality of life. I would lean equally heavy on our legacy commitment for a sense of place, that by incorporating attractive aesthetic design elements, you know that you're in a certain place. This is the bridge with the tulips on it when you're going through Mount Vernon, for example, and that gives a sense of place because there are tulips on their overpass. I would also say that really incorporating aesthetic elements is just an essential element of any good design anywhere. If you're going to put in a railing, you might as well make it an attractive railing. You're going to have to take into mind the fact that there'll be human beings walking around and you'll want them to feel better. So to me, adding aesthetic elements is simply just good design, and 1% is not very much to add these aesthetic elements. I do have a kind of a weird technical question. This morning, the Public Works Committee approved a bid on a public works project that was estimated to be over $2 million, the Bay and State Street, $2.5 million. It turns out the bids came in just under $2 million. And that project, for example, if we had this in place, the railings that the railroad wants to protect, so people don't throw things over onto their railroad track, those, for example, could have been a direct decorative design. What do we do if we put out a bid that says 1% for the art and the bid comes in at $1.9 million?
So we're going to rely on the Planning and Community Development Director and the director, it's going to be either Parks or Public Works most frequently, to look at the planned costs, because you got to plan that artwork in at the very beginning. So if that were the case and Ted and his crew were estimating over $2 million, then it would apply and that railing would be incorporated and the bids would come in and that railing would be included.
So
it
we're
would
going to
still
base
happen.
this on our estimated planning costs and not worry about that. Okay, so Terry?
Yeah, a couple things. One, in terms of Pinky's issue about local bidding, I know there are examples, and I know I brought him to Ted in the past, and he was going to check on a couple of them. I think Mount Vernon has used that, have put out bids that said contractor within 25 miles or a certain distance, and Skagit Valley College on some of their projects have done that, and it's been ruled, it's been fine to be able to put in distances. I'm not sure. I know we're going to look into that possibility. So I know that's been done, and I think it's a great idea because we have one of the highest artists per capita of any city in the United States. We've got amazing artists and things here, and if we're going to spend that money, it would sure be nice to keep it in the local economy, supporting local artists and local architects to be able to do that work. So I would really like to at least see that looked into, but I think this is an idea that's well past its time. This is something I've supported for a long time, so I hope the committee does vote to recommend this, because if they do, I will support it.
Jack?
Darby, through your research on this, what is the most, I don't know what word I want to use, progressive or liberal definition of how other communities have done this? We're contemplating doing this for city projects, but do other communities do it for private projects as well? And is there ability to have that type of requirement?
I'm not aware of, there might be a community that does it for private projects. I'm not aware. I know that there's some communities that do area-wide tax to fund art, that sort of thing, but we're not proposing that. It's most typical for cities to take a % of capital projects. That's the standard.
Yeah, because specifically, and Terry and I were just talking about it, but just associated with the waterfront, it'd be great to have that as an overlay to the entire waterfront area, so that as projects get built, it'd be nice to have the granary project. If they're going to throw millions of dollars at it, to have it decorated up in a way where we have some really nice looking art to for the benefit of the community.
Some communities don't have a threshold. They require it for all capital projects. And some go the direction that we are proposing, which is to look at projects just above a certain level.
But that's for our own projects compared to,
Yeah.
I'm really looking at,
Private projects, yeah. I
or,
haven't-
you know, if we can, I don't know if we can amend our interlocal with the port to have that required, but wouldn't that be nice?
Committee members?
No.
Would anyone on
talk
the
about
committee
it
like
this
to
year.
suggest taking an action of any sort? Pinky?
I would, but I would also like, if possible, to visit that question about whether we can put some sort of preference. I don't want to exclude other artists and designers, but I think it would be great to improve our own economic vibrancy by using local artists and designers and architects. So is there a way that we can do that, or does that mean changing what we've got existing in front of us?
Well, if council provides direction on bringing an ordinance forward, we can also bring forward some amendments to our existing policies and procedures that would incorporate this program, so you could have a chance to look and see how we do that, and we can investigate if that's been done in other communities and how they've worded that.
Right, I move to approve.
I move that we ask staff to develop a draft ordinance to bring back to council that we can discuss at a later time.
Okay, so the motion is to draft an ordinance to implement the a 1% program, and perhaps with looking at any kind of local preferences that might be permissible.
So yeah, just briefly on the local preferences, Terry has already asked us to look into that. We have followed up with Skagit and Mount Vernon and Skagit Valley College, and I know, I believe Mark's doing some research on that as well, and we've shared our information with him. We can certainly come back at a work session, provide what we found in terms of what we can do for local preference, and I will say it is very limited, but we'll give all that information because it has already been requested of us by council. We can put that at the next council meeting.
Thank you, Deb. That's my understanding, too, that there's some state laws that limit how much local preference we can engage in, because it becomes discriminatory after a certain point. But the direction, however, is to include as much as would be permissible potentially into that 1%. Is there any further discussion on the 1% idea? Okay, all committee members in favor of recommending providing direction to staff tonight to develop a 1% program. All those in favor, am I saying?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That's a 3-0. It'll be a unanimous recommendation tonight. That is the end of the Planning Community Development Committee.
Thank you, Michael. We will now